Welcome to Power Up Your Activity Workflow with Java Delegates. I'm Gary Cox, and I'm a senior consultant at Bluefish Development Group. And today we're going to talk about focus on using Java Delegates to provide custom functionality to your workflows. So this is kind of a drill down topic a little bit within the general subject of workflows. Obviously, creating workflows is a pretty broad topic. There's a lot of pieces of that, form development and so forth, but I'm going to talk through some high level, basically, maybe spend some time initially about talking about kind of the basics of Activiti and Alfresco. But then we're going to move into more of a focused look at basically service tasks in Activiti. And then the latter part of the talk, I'm actually going to turn off the slides for a while, and we're going to look at Eclipse and then Alfresco and do some demonstrations so you can see some of the examples. A couple of housekeeping things first. First off, anything you've seen today, I would like to make available. I'll have a link at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to request the materials. Every time I do a presentation here, I want people to take something away, because it's hard to come in here for 50 minutes and just be able to learn something and then take it home without having anything to follow up on. So please feel free to ask for it. We'd love to provide that to you. One other thing, there's some feedback forms that we put out for our own personal use. If you guys can take the time to fill it out and see Terrence, raise your hand, or Troy at the end. I really appreciate that. It helps us know what we did well or not well, and also what to kind of focus on for the future. So it'd be great if you guys could do that. And can I have a quick show of hands? Who currently uses Activiti Workflows with their Alfresco environment? Okay. And how many of you have written your own custom workflows at this point? Some? Okay, cool. And one more question, because this is the last presentation. How many of you were in the previous presentation, the Kickstart? Okay, I was really excited by that, and I hope everybody checks it out, because I spent a lot of time writing the forms for this presentation, and I was like, wow, that would have saved me about three times my time if I had that form development tool. So I hope everybody checks that out. It was really exciting to see that. So our agenda for this presentation, like I said, I'm going to introduce Activiti with Alfresco, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through these introductory slides. Obviously, we want to get to the service task stuff, but I don't ever want to start at the drill down level when we need to set the stage at a higher level. So we'll do a high level overview of Activiti, then we'll kind of understand what the service tasks are and what they're for. Then we'll move into how you can set up your own development environment, and then building your own delegate, and we'll kind of dig into two different workflow examples. One of which is a simple, what I would call a hello world example, so you can understand how to set and get variables coming to and from the workflow. And the other is kind of a pseudo employee salary request type thing where there's actually kind of a flow to it. So we'll go through both of those today. So what I hope that you have take away from today is that you understand kind of the concepts of setting up your own build environment for Activiti, and you feel comfortable being able to build a workflow in Eclipse. Using the Activiti Workflow Console to see where your workflows are and what the variables are in those workflows, and being able to monitor that. Understand what a service task is and how to use that, and how to talk to Spring Beans in Alfresco and utilize that to kind of unleash the power of Alfresco. And then obviously we'll do a demonstration of some sample workflows that use different service tasks. And the wiring is the same in a lot of these, really. I mean, your workflow is talking to a delegate in Alfresco. But I want you to get an idea, kind of start thinking what are the things I might want to do in a workflow and that I can do if I use a Java delegate. What's not covered, well, I'm not talking about JBPM. We're just Activiti. I'm not talking about some of the new cool stuff with Kickstart or Alfresco 4.2. This is really a 4.1, 4.0 centric. And really, we're going to go through some basics, but it's going to be a quick overview. I don't go through all the, here's how you create a workflow form, and here's how you do this and that, because this really is, I want to get down to working with the service task and how to talk to Java objects in Alfresco. And then lastly, we're not covering any of the standalone tools that Activiti provides if you're using that as a standalone engine. This is really kind of focused on the Alfresco/Activiti kind of world. So about service tasks. What are we going to talk about today, and what are we going to do with service tasks? And the code that I'll kind of demonstrate here, and we also have available to you to take home or to request and to come back with. We do things like add aspects to the documents in the package. We can change permissions on the documents. We do some renaming and filing of the documents. We'll access a database from a service task and come back and set variables on the workflow. In certain cases, I demonstrate running as system from the Java object because there are times if you're running as a workflow user, you may need to do something that that user might not have permissions to do, and you need to run a system. And then talk a little bit about manipulating the workflow package. And then obviously handling variables that are in the workflow and manipulating those. So we'll have example Java for each of those things, and we'll go through those. Just real briefly before I move on, I want to talk about who is Bluefish. We are an Alfresco Platinum partner. We've made solutions in the oil energy space. We work with both Workdesk and Share to create solutions. Also with DocuSign, we're a Crafter partner and an Effisoft partner as well. And then we have some of our own sort of standalone products like Migration Workbench where we do content migrations. So just real quickly, we'll do the 50,000 foot view, as I always call it, for the activity and introduction. Obviously, it showed up in 4.0 Alfresco. And it's also its own standalone workflow engine. They provide a custom tool with Eclipse for creating workflows. You're always free to write XML if you like XML. But what I find is wiring up stuff in the design tool is much faster, and if I need to tweak something, I can. But I much prefer the design tool. And then service tasks let you integrate with other systems. And that's kind of what we're going to drill down on today. I think the previous presentation they mentioned, it's basically it's a business process model notation engine. It's a state machine, basically. You move from one state to the next with a set of transitions. It's backed by a database, and there's design tools for creating workflows. We're going to talk about the Activiti Workflow Console today. I want to show a couple quick pictures. If you haven't seen this before, maybe most of you already have if you've worked with Activiti, but this lets you see what's been deployed to Alfresco, and then this is just an example review and approve process workflow. And then one more screenshot. This is the process instances in Workflow Console where you can see where you are in the workflow and also some of the variables in the workflow itself. And I've cut off here, but there's usually a whole bunch more. So these are really useful, and we'll kind of run this side by side with Alfresco Share when we're doing a demonstration. This is the Eclipse design tool. I think it's sort of readable for you guys in the back. Basically, you install the design tool in Eclipse, and then you get a new perspective for Activiti. You can wire together a workflow here, and behind the scenes, XML is generated. And some other things that are kind of behind the scenes, there are database tables for Activiti, starting with ACT underscore in the Alfresco database. And there's a set of library files, like 3 of them that are part of the Alfresco library. You don't have to do any installation to get this. It's all part of the Alfresco installation. It is 5.7. But it sounds like we're soon to be moving to 5.13 and 4.2. So with the stage sort of set, let's kind of get to work and move from the big picture down into working with service tasks in Alfresco and Activiti. So the workflow itself, obviously, you've got a collection of tasks and events, and there's gateways, which can have decision paths that are exclusive and will run in parallel. And all these are tied together by sequence flows. And basically, there's a GUI tool to allow you to design these. And again, you're free to work in XML directly, too. That's fraught with peril for me. I always make mistakes, so I usually use a design tool. Let's talk a little bit about tasks. A lot of the workflows, especially I think all of the visible Alfresco workflows that you get out of the box are made up of user tasks. So they're tied together. I think there's an email task in one of them. But typically, there's a set of user tasks and move from state to state. And all of these have a form and Share or Workdesk where a user is going to enter data, move the workflow to the next transition, and then another user will handle it. But there are automated tasks that are available to you, service task, script task, and email task. And if you notice, there are sort of Alfresco-centric versions of these in the design tool, and they provide some extra goodness to you. For example, the script task allows you the JavaScript wrapper in Alfresco, which exposes some objects in Alfresco to you. The service task is there's just one service task. There's not an Alfresco version. The Alfresco user task provides you some JavaScript hooks, and then you also get the forms for Alfresco. So again, this is our sample workflow, and this is a really simple use case, right? There's 3 user tasks. There's no service task. There's a gateway. This is an exclusive gateway. So they're going to have a review step here. We're either going to go up or down, and then we're going to go to the end. So this is kind of a very simple example of what a workflow looks like. But let's kind of stop there and say, now let's talk about the service task. And then from this point on, we're really going to focus on that. So what is a service task, and how do you put it into your workflow? So basically, it allows for an automated step in the workflow. It allows you a way to communicate with external systems. And in this world, I'm sort of treating Alfresco as an external system. We're running an activity workflow. We're going to talk out to Alfresco and come back. Really, you can make calls out to external databases. You can make RESTful web script calls to other systems. You can make seamless calls to other systems. You can do kind of whatever you want. But it allows you sort of an automation step where you can communicate with other systems. And so using a service task, there are a couple ways you can do this. We're really going to focus on Spring Beans today. But basically, you need to create a Java service task in the workflow itself, and then point it at a Java class that you've created in Alfresco. And the examples today I'm going to show up are Spring Beans. We're going to use Beans. And any of you that currently develop web scripts or custom actions or anything like that are familiar with developing in Alfresco with Java, should all be pretty familiar. It'll look just like any of those things. You could possibly new up a new instance of a class. You don't have to integrate with a Spring Bean. Either way, you can do both ways. Usually a Spring Bean is the way I do it because I want references to the goodness that's in Alfresco itself, like the service registry and so forth. Now, one thing, be careful in here. I don't ever try to maintain any state in my class because watch for thread safety. It's by default single instance. So I don't usually don't try to maintain state in my object. So I want to diverge briefly and talk about the Alfresco script task because I find it confusing sometimes, like, well, do I want to use a delegate or do I want to use a script task? And in many cases, the script task may be perfectly fine. It basically exposes a lot of the objects in Alfresco to you. You can do things like call actions, for example, in the script task. So if you're more comfortable in the JavaScript world, it may be that suits your needs most of the time. But kind of a balancing point between the two, there are a lot of reasons why you might choose one or the other. A lot of times it may come down to personal preference. It may also come down to usability and code reuse. A lot of the advantages that I see of writing in Java and letting the workflow talk back to a Java delegate, obviously you can tie it into the Eclipse debugger, which is great. If you're debugging a workflow, you can put in your breakpoints. You can do hot swap in your code and debug statements so that you can actually kind of change things on the fly and see how they execute. When you're first developing Java, you can actually kind of just sort of comment out your method overrides and just let that run, and you don't have to worry about implementing all of your objects at the same time. So there's lots of advantages there. And then again, if you're like us, we may have a large library of existing tools that you've already created in Java, and you want to utilize those. We, for example, have a lot of library tools that we've created over time, and we want to leverage those. And that makes it easy for us to utilize those from Java objects that we're calling from the workflow. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the stack that I use in my demo. Not a very exciting slide, but I like to kind of demonstrate what I'm running. So I'm using Kepler. Behind the scenes, we use Maven and Ant in our build process. This is Alfresco 4.1.6, and then obviously 5.7 is embedded as part of that. My database is kind of the standard, like Postgres 9.0 that gets installed with the standard installation, and I'm running on Tomcat. So everything you see today will be on this stack. So let's kind of start, what are we going to do to get our development environment up and going, and how to get started with things. The first thing you're going to want to do is get the design tool, and you can get that from activity.org, designer update. So because Alfresco is running 5.7, when I went to install this a while back, I was like, well, I probably want the 5.7 design tool. And I went to go fetch it out of the archives. But what I found was that didn't run against Kepler. And I actually just went ahead and grabbed the latest version, and that has been fine for me. I've had no problems. So I just want to let you guys be aware. It made sense to me intuitively to go that route, but I think using the current one is fine. I've had no problems. It compiles everything, runs fine. So we're going to go through the basic steps of what's required. This is at a high level, and then we'll kind of drill down into each step into the subcomponents. Unfortunately, this is where I beg your forgiveness a little bit, because I want to just kind of show slides and then code and go back. During part of this, I'm going to ask you to hold a lot in your head, because we go through a lot of UML diagrams and stuff before we get to the actual Eclipse environment. I think the flow is better, but there are a fair amount of slides here. But most of them are just overview for your reference. So we're going to go through each of these steps, and I'm sorry I didn't even walk through the steps. The first thing you're going to end up doing is creating your Java class in Alfresco, and then set it up with Spring configuration. And then once you've done that, this is where you may diverge from your just standard Spring Bean config. You do need it to make sure it's registered in the Activity Bean registry, so Activity can actually call it. And then you're going to point at the bean from the workflow and the service task. So we're going to go, based on this high-level overview, we're going to drill down into each of these steps. So step one, I think that might be readable. Let me move over here. Step one basically is to create your class. And in here I have a delegate I've just called my delegate. And you can see there actually is like a helper class in Alfresco called base Java Delegate. And it implements the Java Delegate from Activity. The nice thing about the base Java Delegate, if you see here, it provides you with the service registry. It's already got a reference to the service registry. You just need to call get service registry and you have it. The main thing for custom code is that you're going to override the execute method. And there's a delegate execution interface, and I've put a pointer over here, that provides a lot of the methods that you need to utilize to be able to work with the variables in your workflow. And there's a lot of stuff in the variable scope interface, but I'm just showing kind of the important methods. Most of the things that I kind of work with are get variable, get variables, and things like that. So let's drill down. This is kind of the first step is to create your class where you extend base Java Delegate. So this is kind of a word form of the picture I just showed. But I just wanted to show you in the package where the base Java Delegate lives, just for your reference. So the execute method, again, you're going to be taking delegate execution interface as a parameter. Once you have that, you can basically get and set variables on the workflow. So let's talk a little bit about delegate execution. It extends or implements the variable scope interface. You can actually get a map of variables or get individual variables. In my Hello World demonstration, I'll show you basically getting a map of all the variables from the workflow and then just dumping them to the log file so you can kind of see what sort of things come back from the workflow and what type they are and those types of things. It's kind of really useful when you want to just see, when you're just getting started, having this framework in place where you can actually see kind of what's going on when you get called from the workflow. The types of things you typically get are primitive, like wrapper classes around primitives, like integer and Boolean, string, date, and then this little guy, ActivitiScriptNode, which I'll talk about some more. And then setting values, you can pass primitives back. You can pass strings, you can pass dates. In my code examples, I'm setting a due date that we pass to the task. ActivitiScriptNode, which actually is created from a node ref and a reference to the service registry. I use this in an example where we're basically setting a node ref, and in this case, it's a person that's going to be the assignee. And so we'll demonstrate all of these as well. So let's talk a little bit about the ActivitiScriptNode. You'll end up making a lot of these if you want to pass a person object or a node reference to the workflow. It has a constructor that takes a node reference and then a reference to the service registry. And when you construct this class, pass those in, you get back a node object that you can pass to the workflow. And I keep referring to the Alfresco service registry. Is everybody familiar with what that represents? Are we all good? And basically, it's the container of goodness in Alfresco that gives you the node service and permission service, the file and folder service, all those good things. That once you have the sort of the keys to the vault, I guess, once you have those, you can do whatever you want in Alfresco. And I apologize for not introducing that earlier. So you've created your class. You've extended base Java Delegate. Now at this point, the next step is to set up Spring config. Again, you don't need to pass in the service registry for your bean. You've already got it in the parent if you've extended base Java Delegate. You can also inject other beans. If you've got helper classes, you're free to pass in as many as you need. We pass in my example, I have a very toy database access example because it's real simplistic. But just as an example of passing in a bean and using a helper class to provide database access. This is the third step is sort of the unusual step if you've not done this before, is that you need to register the bean. And we had a couple of strange behaviors around this when we first started working with this quite a while back. And this actually is way back in 4.01, I think, when we first saw this. This needs to be part of the Activity Service Registry, and if it's not registered correctly, when you go to call the class, you'll just basically get a null value for the service registry, and you won't be able to do anything. So what we found is we kind of determined there's a load order issue somewhere where we want to make sure we actually set up a depends on relationship with the activity bean registry. And so I actually demonstrate this to you. Do you have it as your reference? I think it's just good practice. You need this to be instantiated before your bean comes up, and so we depend on this, and then we get registered with it. The way I usually do this now is we just declare a single abstract bean, and then all of our delegate beans, or the parent is the abstract bean, and then you have to do it one time and you're done. And so I'll show that in Eclipse as well. So step 4, this is basically wiring it up to your workflow. So you create your service task and then point at your delegate expression. This is just a template variable with the name of your bean. The one caveat is this bean name, bean ID, matches exactly my class name, case sensitive. So that they do need to match, so it knows what it's trying to call. And that part of the wiring is pretty straightforward. So you're basically just dropping it in, calling your delegate. And what I usually do here is create my class, have basically a stub method that overrides execute, doesn't really do anything, or maybe it outputs a log statement like, hello, I'm here, maybe checks for the service registry, and that's about it. And then run a workflow through, and then you can actually see, hey, all my wiring is working correctly, and then you can go back and start filling in your method definitions. And that's a really easy way to make sure before you go down a path of working on your development that your basic wiring is working. In my workflow, I want to talk about this real briefly. There's a couple places where you may set a variable in a workflow, but you really also want it to get down to the task. I find the easiest way for this is just to write the JavaScript on the creation listener for the user task itself. And so in my hello world example, I do provide an example where I'm setting workflow due date, a couple other variables, and then we write them into the task, and then you see them show up in the task. If you don't do that, then they won't be on the task, and the user will get the task, and it won't have a due date. So I just wanted to mention this briefly. So I want to move into the demonstration. So I've extended my monitor here. I'm going to go back to being in a mirrored mode. But I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to see. The hello world example is what you might expect from a hello world example. It's very short. It's basically a start block, service task, user task, and an end block. That's it. But it provides an example of getting variables, getting the variable maps, writing variables, getting a script node, getting a user out of the script node and outputting it, writing a user back, and all those kinds of things. And so there's actually a lot going on. We do very, very little in a real business process because it just outputs a lot of variables. But for an example, I think it's really useful, and it's a good way to kind of get introduced into writing Java code for service tasks. The employee document example, I call it an employee document example. It's sort of a salary request. And this is an extremely sunny day scenario. There's not really any error handling here. It's just meant to demonstrate a couple of different things. One is we actually launched this off of, not from a human with a start task, but I've created an action on a folder that starts the workflow and then signals the start task to be done. And then we actually go straight out to a service task, do a database dip, pull back some key value pairs for the employee, write those to workflow variables, and then when the user finally gets the tasks, it's all populated. And this, again, it's a pretty simple example, but being able to launch a workflow from an action is pretty common. Knowing to terminate the start task or signal it to end is important. And then kind of seeing how you might integrate. Now, my database is, it's living next to Alfresco on my Postgres server. But in the real world, you might be calling out to anything. It could be anywhere. So I'm going to switch my perspective here just a second, and we'll see. Hopefully good things happen. Let's see. That part's OK. All right, so I'm running at a 1024 by 768 over here. So we'll see how it goes. So first I want to show you, so that looks pretty good, I think. This is my Eclipse environment. Again, I'm running Kepler. I have the activity perspective up here. I'm not using it right here, but I want to show you my workflows. This is the first one. This is hello world. Again, it's very simple. We actually fire off programmatically from a folder action, go right through the service task, and then, oh, I'm sorry, this one is human launched. Go through a service task and then go to another user task just to see what has changed. The employee example, it's a little more complicated. This is the one where here, this start is not done by a user. It's done from a rule. Again, we go pull some data, write it to the workflow. The HR person can see that. The HR person sort of says, yay, this is great, they can have a raise, or no, I don't think so. And goes through a decision block, and we'll go down to our supervisor, or we'll go off this way as being approved. So this first service block will demonstrate kind of an external system, which is a database alongside Alfresco here. But it'll show you kind of pulling data back and writing it. This one is something we actually end up doing a lot with our customizations. We're adding an aspect to the documents. And actually what I do here is grab the entire workflow package and iterate through all the documents and see which ones are employee documents and add the aspect to it. And in this case, we call it an approval aspect. The key part here is this block and this block are calling the same delegate. The behavior is just based on the data in the workflow. So this is an example kind of leveraging your code. You don't have to write a class for every single service task. You can reuse these across workflows if needed, if you make them generic enough. In this case, I'm using the same class. Lastly, or second to last, I guess, is the update payroll. And this is a simplistic update to the database where we're updating a value on the employee salary, just to show a callback to the database. And then finally, this is a pretty common need, I think, is we're doing filing and setting permissions. So we're starting the document in one place, but it's going to end up being filed somewhere in a subfolder in this case. And we're basically, because we're going to say this is an employee document, we're stripping away all inheritance and permissions on that and giving only the HR group permissions to see this. So you'll see that as well. And lastly, there's sort of a superfluous user task. This is my verify completion, just so we can kind of see what we get at the end of the workflow. So with those workflows kind of introduced, let's talk about what we did to sort of set these up. So here's my service task here for Hello World. You can see in my main config, I've declared that I have a delegate expression called Hello World Delegate. And if I go over here in Eclipse, I've created a package called Hello World, which should make this faster, sorry. And let me, you can see here I've extended the base Java delegate. And here I've overridden the execute method. And so I have an execution, parameter, which is basically a delegate execution. So I'm going to kind of walk through this. Again, I really would like you guys, if you want to take this home, request it, and I'd be glad for you guys to have it so you can try it out. But basically, the first thing I do is look to see if I have a valid service registry. If I do, then all is well. If I don't, I log an error, and then I blithely continue on because this is a demo, right? Normally, you would have error handling in here and do a different path. But there's some cool things you can do. And so I want to provide a lot of different examples here. So here I can see who is this workflow running as. In this case, it's running as whoever just started it. So if admin starts it, it's admin. If test user starts it, it's test user. So it kind of gives you an idea, like after a user task, the next service task is going to be running as the sort of whoever previously handled the workflow. And once I've done that, I actually also get, from the service registry, get a reference to the node service. And so now we can set properties on the nodes. I've created a bunch of little helper methods to do different things. The first one is output variable map. So what I do here is just get a map back from the workflow. I say, give me all your variables, please, and get them back in a map. The map's a string key names with a bunch of objects. I'm going to walk over here. It's easier to. So I actually just iterate through the map and then just log out the key name, the value name, and then just for ease, like what type what it is, whether it's a string or an integer or whatever. This has no real business world use, I don't think, but it's very useful for you as a developer to see kind of what's going on in the workflow. Now once that's done, we move into, oops, sorry, I skipped a step. We move into getting the initiator. This is sort of an example of grabbing a node off of the workflow. So the initiator is not like a string or anything like that. It's a node reference. And I can actually, it comes back, I can cast it as an ActivitiScriptNode, then pass it to basically a script node. ActivitiScriptNode extends script node. Once I have that node, I can get the node ref, sorry about the pop-ups. I can get the node ref off of that. And then once I have the node ref, I can, from its properties, get the name, and then I just output the username as a string. So you can see who the initiator is and just output it as a string. Once I've done that, I do some setting of variables. And this is kind of the inverse of getting, right? But this is useful. So I'm setting some things here. So I'm sort of deviously overriding whatever the message was the other user typed in. Then I'm just newing up a date object. And then I'm setting that as the due date. So whatever poor person gets assigned this task is basically has it due right now. Setting the priority and so on. And then setting the description itself on the workflow. And that's really it. It's pretty straightforward. The last thing we do is I want to change who the assignee is. So when this workflow is initiated from the start, I select a user that I want to assign the workflow to. This goes off to the service task. The delegate, well, in this case, the delegate takes a constant, but you would normally do some logic, right, where you would figure out who the user might be and actually changes the assignee programmatically. So in my example I'll run, you'll see I'll assign it to a user, and then it's going to be assigned to basically a guy. Can you see that? Oh, test. And then we're done. And so that's really it for the Hello World workflow. It's pretty simple. I think, but it shows you a couple of concepts that are important. It shows you, how to talk to Alfresco objects from the workflow, how to talk to a delegate, how to create your Java object, what to extend, how to wire it up in Spring and set up and register it with the activity registry, how to basically set and get variables and all those kinds of things. And this is a lot of what you'd end up doing in an automation task if you want to call out to Alfresco. So I'm going to run this real quick. Sure.
Did you show where you sign in the actual Java code in the activity?
Just 1 second, sir.
It's already.
I was wondering, how do you, did you show the Spring bin where you
I did not. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I would run off into that. That's an important step.
Okay.
So and this is sort of our standard, this is how we package things up for our Maven builds. And what he was asking, I don't know if y'all heard, I skipped right through the step of where we're actually setting up the Spring Bean. So I have a context XML file called workflow beans. Let me do this. So this is my abstract bean that I use as a base, called abstract workflow delegate. This parent is the base Java delegate, and this is where I set up the depends on activity bean registry. And now anything else I declare, the parent is abstract workflow delegate. So they all have the depends on. So here, I'm not injecting anything into Hello World. It's just, there's no other dependencies, but you can see in some of the other ones, I'm passing in some properties, and then down in the last one we'll talk about, I'm passing in the utilities class. So that's the basic wiring in the context file. Thank you, I appreciate you asking that, thank you. So let's start this up, and I don't want to be test, because that's where we're going. I will be admin. And this is a minimalist workflow. I got tired of writing forms, so there's only a few minimal fields on here. But I'm going to set up my assignee. So I'm going to say, I want to send this to HR. And I want to say, hello, HR. I'm not even going to add an item to this, but I'm just going to start it off. And this goes to take a look at it. This actually is a different task. Sorry, the other one was old. But you can see it's already gone through the service task. Now we're in the next user state. We're waiting for the user to pick up the task. But if you see here, the assignee has changed. I assigned it to the HR manager, but I programmatically changed that to be test. And then down here, you can see kind of all the different variables. And you can see in my hello world message, which is in a custom model, I've changed that. I've overwritten that as well. And I've also set a priority, a description, and then a due date, which was just the current, whatever the current time date is. So I'm going to log out now and log in as test. You can see here the message on my task and the due date. And I want to jump over real quick back to the workflow. I mentioned writing the variables down to the task, and I do that here, so I just want to show that. I apologize for 1024 by 768. But. So I'm taking the workflow due date, and I'm setting it to the task due date here. And there's also another one for the message and the priority. So that's just on creation event of this task. And if you go back into the task, you can see it has been indeed been updated. It's been changed programmatically. So it's a pretty simple example, but it provides kind of all the goodness of setting all this stuff up. And so with that, you can really leverage kind of starting to work on your own stuff. Now I want to show the employee workflow. It's a little more complicated, but not a whole lot. I've set up a different package here where I have 4 different delegates, one of which we use twice. So this add aspect to package documents we use twice. So I'm going to show the employee workflow. So pull employee data. Basically, I'm just doing an employee data lookup here. And this is, let me do this again. I think for time reasons, I probably won't be able to go through all this code, each of the classes, but I can kind of skim through it so you get an idea of what's going on. This one, we're basically making use of another object that was injected, a Spring Bean called database utils. I'm also showing you like who is the run as user, and then getting the current employee ID, and then calling out to the database with all this information, or calling out to the database with the employee ID and getting back a bunch of information about the employee. And in the log file, we'll see logging for that. We'll see logging as well for this. This is with the Hello World workflow. This is, you can get it in the console as well, but you can see where I'm setting and getting values. You can see I get back strings, ActivitiScriptNodes, and so forth. I don't know if, oh wow, that's really terrible. I'm sorry. Is that even viewable? You can see on some of these like what type these different values are. So status, value's not yet started, the type is string, and so on. So I'm just dumping these to the log, and that's what I was talking about before. Thank you. So here in our employee use case, the Hello World was kind of a standalone use case. It doesn't really have any tie to the repository itself. You just fire off the workflow and it runs. The employee workflow, we have basically a site I created called Summit. Oops. In that we have a document library with a employees folder. The employees folder contains, as you might guess, employees. We only have one employee or sad company, I think, so far. Hopefully we'll get more. But the important part of the folder is it's a specialized folder. It's not a CM folder. This actually has an employee ID on it. And so when I drop a document into the employee folder, it's going to pull that ID. There's actually an action on employees that will fire off the workflow based on anything dropped into the subfolder. Now, in the end, what happens is, whether it's approved or rejected, we're filing it to a subfolder. To keep from relaunching my workflow forever and ever and ever, I look for an aspect. If you put the approve or reject aspect onto the document, and I can use that as an exclusion criteria for launching the workflow. Otherwise, I just keep launching my workflow forever. So pretty simple use case, but you can see I've already filed some documents in here. I simplistically rename these documents to have the employee's ID. He happens to be employee ID 123. So let me start this off. I'm in the folder. Let's say I dropped a salary request, and we're just going to make this by hand. So, oops. So he wants a big raise. I'm going to create the content. Oops, did that fire off? Oh, sorry. Too hasty in my button clicking. So that should have launched off on a workflow. And you can see it has a workflow icon here. Just in the workflow itself, it's assigned to the HR group. So we're going to be an HR person for a minute. You can see the workflow has arrived to me. And you can see I have a first name, a middle initial, a last name, the employee ID, which I already had from the folder, and a current salary. So none of this came from the start task. All this came from the database. I just did a quick lookup. So the HR person could say, sure, you can have $500,000 and approve this and send it along. And then basically, if you look over in the workflow console, you will see we have moved. Can I not scroll that way? I may have reached the limit of my resolution of my monitor. But we have actually gone off the screen. I don't think for some reason I can't actually scroll that way. But we've gone through the task, through the HR approval. It's been approved. So we should already have, basically they should be waiting for the HR person to verify completion. And there it is. So we have Joe Smith, 123, previous salary was 100,000. The new salary is 500,000. The outcome of the review, I'm the same person in this case, but it's an approval. And then I'm going to say task done. And let's go find that document. So you can see a couple things happened, right? I appended the employee ID, so renaming and filing from the workflow. It is in the approved folder now, so it's been moved but the delegate did all this work. Down here, you can see we've applied an aspect from the workflow. So we have an approver. Admin actually is the approver of everything in this example. But the outcome is approved. And now you can see here, permissions, nobody has privileges. If I go back to repository view, you'll see that only the HR group has privileges. So I'm down to 5 minutes. So I'm going to have to go quick kind of on the classes. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. But if we're short on time, please, I'll be here through tomorrow. And I'm also going to have on the last slide my email address if you guys have any questions or want to follow up, especially if you want to try this out on your own. So real quickly, let me show you kind of what I'm doing. This is the employee data lookup, where I'm basically grabbing some fields and grabbing the ID and doing a database query and coming back and setting the fields. I do want to show kind of the action. This is not a Java delegate, but this is a useful thing to have. Basically, I'm dynamically launching the workflow. And then once I've done that, I signal it that the start task is completed. So as part of the launching of the workflow, I'm actually just determining what should be added to the package. So I'm grabbing that document. So the document reference comes into the action method here, and I'm actually saying, OK, add this to the workflow package, add all these other variables. And you could set a whole bunch of stuff. I'm only setting a few variables here. And then I'm launching the workflow, telling it the start task is ended, and then the HR user gets that task after it's gone through the service task. Add aspect is pretty straightforward. The only unusual thing in here is, in theory, if I added 5 documents that were employee documents, I would iterate through all of them and add the aspect to each of them. So you could handle a set of documents if you wanted to in this use case. And a lot of times, a workflow is not a single document, right? You may have several documents as part of a package. So I show kind of getting the children of the package node and then iterating over them, adding aspects to them. Update employee is a very simplistic call back to the database utils tool where I basically just update the salary, just doing a simple update on a row in a database. File and set permissions. You want to do it in 2 minutes? OK. I'm using the file folder service here, basically, to move the document, rename it, and then we're changing the permissions on the document down here. I break inheritance, basically, and then I specifically remove all permissions and set only one group, which is the HR group. This is a toy example, right? But this kind of demonstrates kind of working with that in a workflow. So let me relaunch my slides. That's kind of the end of the demo portion. Let me go back to my slides real quick. I want to provide some resources, if you guys can see those. Activity.org, obviously, bpmn.org. I think everybody here has already worked with Workflow when I did a poll, but if you're ever interested in kind of getting started with Workflow, Jeff Potts put a really good tutorial together. He had one for JBPM and he wrote a new one for Activity, and they're both really good. So I would recommend those. I got questions. I'm going to go ahead and put the next slide up, though. A couple of things. If you want the sample code, we'll package this up. You can go here, bluefishgroup.com, events/alfresco-summit-boston. Tomorrow, Terrence McDevitt, who's in the audience, is going to be talking about working with DocuSign, and he's using Workflow for that, and he's also using Alfresco Workdesk. So it's a chance to kind of see Workdesk with Workflow. So I hope you guys can attend that. Do we have time for questions? Any questions? If we don't have time, please come up afterwards and talk to me. I'd be glad to answer any questions. We're out of time. Yeah, sorry guys. Please come up if you have any questions. Thanks a lot for your attention. I appreciate it.